Billy Carroll. A woman by the name of Pat Carroll recounted a story about her son Billy. When he was about 2 years old, they baked a cake and used powdered sugar. Pat hated powdered sugar, so she never used it around him. Billy wanted her to make a certain type of cookie that his auntie made, so she had to get some of the powdered sugar and use it for the frosting. She sat Billy on the table next to her so he could help her mix things. When it was time to make the frosting, she opened up the yellow box of powdered sugar, and her son asked, "What's that?" She told him that it was a kind of sugar that wasn't very good, but he wanted to taste some, so he put his little finger in the box and tasted it. Suddenly, the expression on his face completely changed, and he now looked deep and calm, and his shoulders dropped. He now looked much older than his age. He said, "Oh, that's what my grandmother used to use." His mother was confused because she knew that her mother never baked, so who was he talking about? She asked him if it was his other grandmother, and he said, "No, my other grandmother," and insisted it was his other grandmother. She asked, "Which grandmother are you talking about?" He said, "My olden days grandmother." She asked, "Who was your olden day grandmother? What do you mean?" He told her that this grandmother used to bake all of the time and loved to use this kind of sugar. He was smiling and very happy as he explained to his mother how she loved him so much and how he really loved her. Thinking her son must be dreaming about something else, she nevertheless continued to question him. "Do you have a mother?" And he replied, "Yes, I did have a mum." "Did you have a father?" He then looked a bit confused before saying, "There were a couple of guys who lived there sometimes, but I don't think they were my dad, and I don't know who they were. They were my mummy's friends." His mother thought it was a strange kind of dream for a 2-year-old to have, and knew that he hadn't seen it on TV because she always watched TV with him. At this stage, his mother didn't know what to think, so she stopped baking in order to give him her full attention. He then started to use words that were too big for such a little child, and felt that he was talking like an older boy. He was using full sentences, which was very unusual for him. He didn't pause, he didn't search for words, and he didn't struggle to describe things, like he normally did, and appeared very fluent. The words just flowed out of his mouth. She was surprised because he had never talked like that before. Has all this been triggered by tasting powdered sugar? She then pressed him for more information, but at the same time did not want to lead him. He looked happy and told her how he and his grandmother would sit on the back porch and look across huge fields and watch trains go by in the distance. He had obviously not got any ideas from their current home because they lived in an apartment and there were no trains around for him to see and no open fields. She asked her son what happened to his family and his grandmother. He became very sad and looked melancholy. He told her that his family didn't have any money and they couldn't keep him. She asked, "So where did you go?" He said, "They didn't have money to buy food, Mom. We used to go to the grocery store and the man at the store used to give us bread. And then one day he told us that he couldn't do that anymore unless we paid him. And we didn't have any money, so we couldn't pay him." His olden days grandmother used to make him cakes. He said they didn't have any money and they couldn't take care of him, so they had to let him go. She asked him whether he went to live with someone else. Billy suddenly got frustrated and annoyed at her question, and then glared at her, saying, "No, they had to let me go, Mum." She told him she didn't understand, and again asked him where he went. He then looked deep into her eyes and said, "Mum, they gave me to you." She got chills throughout her body. She asked, "How did Daddy and I get you?" And he replied, "They had to let me die. I was 7 years old when I died. They were very sad, but they knew that they had to let me go because they couldn't take care of me anymore." "Well, how did you die?" He said, "In a car crash in front of a Toyota dealership when I was 7 years old." His mother was stunned by what he had said because there was no way he could have known what a Toyota dealership was. Dealership was one of those words that was totally out of his vocabulary. She asked Billy if he knew when this was or where he lived, and he said, "Hollywood." And she said, "Hollywood, California?" "No," he said, "Hollywood, Texas, in 1987. How could all this come from a 2-year-old? His mother worked at a research firm and was able to get a detailed atlas and found a small town in Texas called Hollywood Park. Later, when she asked him to tell her more about his grandmother, he went back to being a 2-year-old child, had no interest in telling her anything more. But every now and then he would bring it up on his own and would tell her more of the story about his grandmother. Although he seemed to be close to his past grandmother, his grandmother was the big link. He would continue to talk about the back porch and watching the trains, but he was also hung up on the big man in the grocery store who told them that they couldn't have any more bread, saying he just doesn't understand. They just can't take care of me anymore. He would tell her the specific story about 3 times a year without changing any of the details. He always described the very strong love, his grandmother's love, and how much they loved each other. Then, as quickly as the memories came, they went. His mother asked whether there were any unusual fears that could relate back to this past life. She said that when he was in his car seat and her husband or she would drive with only one hand on the wheel, he would yell, "Hold 2 hands! Hold 2 hands!" over and over until they held onto the wheels with both hands. Her son ate a lot, and when he got home from school, he would eat at least 2 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. He loved to eat anything, any time, and would get very wild when he was hungry. When he was old enough to go to kindergarten, and on his first day, she went to pick him up and was eager to hear how his day went. But as soon as he got in the car, he threw his bag down in disgust and cried, "I hate it. They didn't let me do anything I wanted to do. Don't they know that I'm supposed to be in 2nd grade?" He said that because when he died at age 7, he would have been in 2nd grade. Gaynor Marsh. 2-year-old Gaynor Marsh came from the Isle of Man, near the UK. One morning her mother was about to make her some porridge for breakfast, but Gaynor said she didn't like porridge. Her mother replied, "How do you know because you've never had it before?" Gaynor replied, "I had it when I was a little girl before, and I didn't like it then." At that stage her mother assumed she was making up a story not to eat porridge and ignored her comment. She then said to her mother, "When I was a mummy, I never made my girls eat things they didn't want." Her mother asked, "What little girls?" "My 2 little girls when I was a mummy. I didn't shout at them either. I was a nice mummy." Gaynor said how she used to play with her little girls and how she taught them to sew. She also liked to pick blackberries, and her girls would watch her make blackberry jam. Gaynor also described their clothing, such as long frocks that went down to the ground. One afternoon they went out for a walk down a narrow country lane and came upon an old cemetery. The moment Gaynor saw the graveyard, she got excited and then shouted out, "This is where I was born." This strange incident took her mother Marjorie back to something unusual that happened when Gaynor was only a few months old. One evening when Marjorie had gone to bed, she suddenly found herself in the doorway of a room she didn't know. The room was illuminated by a pinkish-orange light. In the room was a family that she had never seen before. There was a mother and a father and 2 children. They were wearing old-fashioned clothing that looked as if it had been handmade. The woman had an ankle-length dress made of coarse brown linen. It was gathered at the neckline and waist by a cord. There was a long white apron over the dress, like an old-fashioned pinafore. The father sat by a blazing fire while the children played and laughed. The room was sparsely furnished, and the family looked fairly poor. The furniture in the room looked very crude, with a large wooden table and wooden benches. The father was sitting on one of the benches, smoking a strange-looking pipe with a very long stem. He wore a lightish-coloured shirt and a dark brown jacket. Marjorie had a feeling that the scenario she was looking at appeared to be from around the 17th century, and although they looked poor, it was not abject poverty. As she stood there observing, she half expected them to turn around and ask her what she wanted, but they just ignored her presence. Marjorie felt drawn to the mother as she was setting the table for a meal using wooden plates and bowls. She was standing with her back to the fire and could see she was in her 20s. Her hair was tied back with a scarf on her head and her sleeves were rolled up as she served the food. She then felt herself being pulled backwards, where the doorway got smaller and smaller until it resembled a black tunnel. Then it seemed like a small black hole until she realized she was looking at the pupil of an eye. That eye was the pupil of a baby Gaynor lying in the cot. Then the next moment she was sitting up in bed and staring around the room. It appears that Marjorie had had an out-of-body experience where her astral body had appeared in front of the previous life of her daughter Gaynor. That the mother in the scenario was actually Gaynor in that past life, and she had a strong impression that the young girls playing on the floor were the two girls that her daughter would later talk about. What was it in that moment that allowed Marjorie to be taken back to the previous life of her daughter from around 300 years ago? If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to hit like. It really helps to keep the channel growing. And if you're new here, subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest videos. We've got lots of strange and fascinating stories coming up, and we'd love to have you along for the journey. In 1981, Ray Bryant was a freelance journalist working for the Evening Post in Reading, England. He was sent to do an interview with hypnotherapist Joe Keaton, who had just written a book. Ray had always been interested in reincarnation and had a few strange recurrent dreams that fascinated him, but had no sense of ever having lived a past life. Ray underwent a few regressive sessions where it took 12 sessions over a year before he managed to make any progress. After going through the usual regressive routine, they finally had a breakthrough in going back to a past life. All of a sudden, he found that he was a soldier and that his name was Reuben Stafford. Reuben was in a Lancashire regiment and his barracks were in Preston. He was able to remember the names of other officers in his regiment. Over a number of sessions, they found that Reuben had been born around 1820 in Brighton, which he then called by his original name, Brighthelmstone. On checking historical records, Brighton was originally called Brighthelmstone, and the name was used from the 14th to the 18th centuries. The family had moved to Ormskirk, Lancashire, where his father worked in the town hall. The strangest thing was that Ray was born in the south of England, but when he was regressed back to Reuben Stafford, he immediately took on a strong Lancashire accent. Ray had never been to Ormskirk, but under hypnosis he was able to describe a cross they have in the town square. The cross still exists and is known as Market Cross. He married a woman called Mary and joined the army at the age of 22 and fought in the Crimean War that took place between 1853 and 1856. One day in the Guildhall Library, a researcher came upon a book with the name of all the casualties of the war, where he found his name Sergeant Reuben Stafford. They were able to check his army record, where he had served in the 47th Regiment of Foot. Without prompting Ray, they would ask him a question about a certain date, and he was able to come up with the correct answer. Ray was also tested on the medals that Reuben had received, where they told him he'd received 4. But Ray claimed he'd only won 3 because the 4th wasn't really a proper medal because it wasn't given by the Queen. Reuben had served in Malta and Canada, where Ray had never been to in his life. Reuben was asked to go to a place called Strada Stretta in Malta, which, as it turns out, was full of brothels. Ray knew nothing about Malta. He was then asked to go to the Gut, which the soldiers knew was Strada Stretta. Reuben started laughing because he knew it was the place that soldiers visited for prostitutes. He was asked to describe the location, and he said it had many steps and the women were pretty rough. As Reuben, Malta had a strong effect on Ray, as he was able to describe many vivid images, as if he'd recently been there himself. The same was with Canada, where Reuben would describe the buffaloes on the plains. Reuben had also served on an island in the Aegean, which he was able to describe in detail. He spent a lot of time describing his time in the Crimean War. In one session, he was questioned by a colonel about a minor battle that his regiment had led. He immediately saw himself wading through a river and shrapnel was falling all around him. He was struggling in the water and it was freezing cold. He was asked what objects had captured, and he described flags and drums, which were shiny and made of brass. They looked like something you see in a church. It turns out that his regiment did capture some drums that were decorated with spread eagles like the ones on church lecterns. He went on to describe his most disturbing memory, which was at the Battle of the Quarries, where he was wounded. He was running up a hill and was out of breath and gasping for air. He wasn't frightened because he had to keep order with his men. He had to ignore the bullets and shrapnel that were all around him because his task was to defeat the enemy at the top. As he was running, he suddenly grabbed his left hand in pain. Bray could see the incident but fortunately not feel the pain. He then found himself in a field hospital. All of this had been recorded in detail, whereas Sergeant Reuben Stafford was wounded in his left hand in the Battle of the Quarries on June 7, 1855. Whilst in the hospital, he could smell the death and was surrounded by dead soldiers. It was in the hospital where he saw Florence Nightingale. He said she was like a mother who was a gentle small lady walking through the ward, but she was not carrying a lamp, which is how history portrays her. She was well known to the soldiers. She was the Angel of Crimea because she was the one who brought proper treatment to the soldiers for the first time. Before that, soldiers were just left to die. Ray said that before being regressed, he was rather squeamish and could not watch operations even on the television. But after experiencing what Reuben had been through, he did not worry about such things. Ray had never sailed up the River Mersey in Liverpool in his life, but Reuben had when he returned from the Crimea and was able to accurately describe the entrance to the Mersey. He had not seen his wife for 2 years, and he now had a son who was 18 months old, and tears began to run down his cheek. He was asked about the men he was with and was able to give their names, ranks, and whether they were wounded. All of this was verified in the war records. He said the coming back from war was an anticlimax. As he went forward, they found his life started to take a downward turn, where his wife had died and he went to live with his son in London, which did not work out. It turns out that after Reuben had left the army, he became depressed and frustrated because it had been his life. He was now alone in his late 50s and working as a waterman on the Thames River. He was ill from the cold and the harsh conditions, and he suffered from bronchitis. His life was meaningless. In another session, Ray regressed back to the moment of his death, where he suddenly found himself struggling for breath, which felt like he was drowning. He felt his lungs were filling up. He was quickly brought back. Reuben's death certificate showed that he died by drowning. Because he was depressed, and he decided to jump off a barge into the Thames. Reuben's body was found on April 2, 1879 at Millwall Dock. After the death of Reuben Stafford, he underwent other sessions with other lives, and one particular life he did not like was that of a man called Robert Sawyer, who he regarded as very simple. He considered him a village idiot, shy and stupid, who died in April 1938. Ray was born in January 1939, so he was born very shortly after Robert Sawyer's death. In yet another session, Ray was taken back to a life before Reuben, and he came upon a man called Wilfred Anderton. Wilfred was a coachman who lived his early life in Bristol in the 1700s. Much of his time was spent on the London to Bath run. He would occasionally stop at inns, and life was easy, where he had a bit of money, food, and ale. He described the inn as having a fire in the grate, whilst he had a jug of ale and sitting at a wooden table. Wilfred would like to chat with his friends. On one occasion, the innkeeper made him a strong drink that he called the blunderbuss. That was half rum, half ale, and a dash of gunpowder. After drinking this concoction, he got so intoxicated he thought he was dying. He would later witness a highwayman being hanged where people would pull on his legs to make it quick for him, otherwise they could hang there for hours. They were unable to find any records for Wilfred because it was too far back. Before Wilfred, he was a young girl called Winifred who was very ill and spent a lot of time in bed in a nice room. She died around the age of 8. They went even further back where they were unable to understand modern English. Death doesn't worry Ray at all now because he has died so many times before he's certain that he will come back all over again.